This area that we live in now was originally a matriarchy. It was Iroquois territory at Tioga, and the wisdom of the grandmothers has been inherent in the Canadian story from the very beginning. So much of what we feel is a European democracy that we've created really owes so much to the democratic traditions of the First Nations. The talking circle, the way of choosing a chief. So many of these things are things that we have assimilated almost unknowingly as we've grown as a country. We are, as John Ralston Saul has said, a Métis nation in many ways. So if I start tonight totally unscripted supporting the grandmothers, I feel so comfortable and at home. I'd like to start by thanking my honorable opponent, who I like to think of as Her Majesty's disloyal opposition, for coming out tonight. I know that he is deeply committed to his vision of Canada. I guess I have certain non-traditional reasons for supporting the continuation of the Crown in Canada, and certain traditional reasons for opposing republicanism in Canada, probably the same as Brock and Tecumseh's. First of all, let me say that I am neither English or British by birth or lineage. I'm in fact an Irish, German, Polish Canadian, which means that I have a tendency to get drunk and invade myself. And then feel guilty about it. Nor do I have anything to do with the family compact. I don't even drive. I was born working class and have recently returned very grudgingly to my roots. And so I have no other point of view at this point than the underpaid and overworked. And the last Tory that I supported was John A. Macdonald. And it's only respect for my opponent that keeps me from quoting the "pardon me, I always do that when I hear my friend's voice speak" line. I have 5 reasons for opposing the resolution, and indeed the Resolutionary War. My first reason is that I believe that if we examine the history of republicanism in North America, we will see a model that Canada does not want to follow. Now, Tom has made it clear that nor does his organization, but I will remind you that the struggle for Canada has always been to exist next to the biggest superpower in human history, the greatest propaganda machine in human history, a nation that has 10 times our population, and will always be the mirror that we have to challenge ourselves around. So I'm not as willing as Tom is to simply reject the idea of American republicanism as what would be the likely paradigm in a Canadian republic. My second reason is that if we examine the history of the Crown in Canada and Canada's relationship to the Crown, which certainly we must do if we are considering abandoning it, then we will find that it is intrinsically linked with democracy in Canada. I'll return to that. My third reason is that I believe that Canada is one of the most grown-up democracies in the world. And to suggest in this kind of schoolyard taunt that Canada hasn't grown up enough yet is an insult to the 3 founding cultures, to the people who have come here with vision, and the people who have fought and died for this democracy. My fourth reason is that I believe that this whole issue is at best a trivial distraction from real challenges to our democracy and to our society. My fifth reason is that at its worst it is continentalist and would lead to a diminishing of Canada as an independent country. Okay, reason number 1. How would the freedom-loving peoples of the world react if, upon achieving Canadian citizenship, the judge looked them in the eye and said, "Congratulations, you are now Canadian Republicans"? No, this is all about image. It's all about perception. It's all about symbol. So when we look at republicanism, much as we would like to distance ourselves from the Bushes and the Nixons and that particular ilk, in Canada, that is the republic that we've grown up next to, in the shadow of, in many cases, and have defied it time and time again, I'm reminded of Lyndon Johnson picking up Lester Pearson and pushing him up against the wall, saying, "You peed in my pocket." That is the republic that we will always be next to. That is the elephant that could roll over and at any point change history. Re-examining the history of republicanism in North America brings us to the lesser-known causes of the American Revolutionary War, beyond the notion that taxation demanded representation, and no one could argue with that. The other causes of the war, of course, are the ones that never made it to Hollywood. Number one, that the American colonies opposed the notion that the British had that the First Nations had the right to great tracts of land that were theirs by right of heritage and treaty. The American settlers wanted that land. That the American colonies opposed the Quebec Act that granted religious and language rights to French-speaking Canadians, even though they had come out the worst in a military conflict between us. This was a totally un-American concept. The American businessmen wanted the fur trade. And that the American slave owners were appalled at the enlightened ideas that were sweeping through Britain in regard to the immorality of keeping slaves. George Washington, of course, a slave owner, fighting for his right to sign a piece of poetry based on the ideal that all men are created equal. That would one day lead his Republican descendant, George II, to gather a coalition of the willing to wage an illegal war for oil in Iraq. Is that the kind of principles and Republican monarchy we want for Canada? I say nay. Reason number two, re-examining Canada's relationship to the Crown. When the Republicans were up in arms in creating the United States of America, they tended to gather together in little democratic groups called mobs. And the people that they mobbed and drove from their homes and stole their land were people who were loyal to the Crown, Tom's ancestors. Some of them were British, obviously. There were a great deal of Germans, again, Tom's ancestors, not mine, we just hadn't got here yet, who had been soldiers in the British forces, and Africans who had made certain astute political observations about freedom in the land of the free. These loyalists came to Canada in such a number that they in fact became the population in many ways of the maritime provinces, the eastern townships of Quebec, and indeed what became Upper Canada, the province of Ontario. There was little or no European settlement in Ontario until the Loyalists arrived. Indeed, Ontario's motto is "Loyal she began and loyal she remains." I shudder to think of how some bureaucrat would rewrite that. So the first political institutions were largely put into place for and by these groups, with the belief in the principles of Magna Carta and parliamentary democracy, and they remain what define us today. We're talking about anniversaries. December the 30th will be the anniversary of William Lyon Mackenzie's march down Yonge Street. Mackenzie wanted to create a Canadian republic. I have great love for Mackenzie, but his ultimate tactic was for Canada to join the United States, and his last attack on Canada was launched from the United States with the best wishes of the American government. Again, the history of republicanism in the Canadian context in North America. The fundamental debt that future Canadians owe to Mackenzie and his Quebecois counterpart and compatriot Papineau is that they brought the inequities in Canada and the rule of the family compact, the rich families, into focus and paved the way for visionary Canadians, Robert Baldwin and Louis Lafontaine, working with the Crown's representative, Lord Elgin, to create one of the most lasting, peaceful democracies on the planet. I hasten to add that Joseph Howe was doing the same thing single-handedly in Nova Scotia. LaFontaine, Baldwin, and Howe laid the groundwork for a system that, when it is working, is one of the most inclusive and egalitarian systems we know. And one of the hallmarks of their government was their passionate commitment to peaceful resolution of conflict. This commitment is exemplified in the moment when Tory rebels, incensed that the government should treat people in Quebec with the same respect they were treated in Ontario, burned down the Parliament buildings. This was the moment when LaFontaine, Baldwin, and the Governor-General, by all rules of empire and republics, should have called in the army. Instead, they made the conscious decision to hold back, and they waited it out, and they negotiated, and they created Canada. Without violence and without disloyalty. That history, whether we know it or not, permeates Canada's fondness for its queen and her entertaining offspring. and for her grandmother. Why do we have Victoria Day weekend? No one else has to have a May 2-4 weekend. Hands up here who wants to give up Victoria Day. I'm sure that an anti-monarchist would say, well, we'd keep it, but we'd call it something else. I don't want to call it something else. I don't want to call the Grey Cup something else. I don't want to call the Stanley Cup something else. I want the candidate that I grew up in because I think it's the best candidate that's available to everybody that lives here and everyone who's come here. And that brings up a whole subsection. That whenever a country decides to make this kind of change, okay, it is always done by aesthetic amateurs. So who is going to change the rich imagery and resonances of the crown? Bureaucrats. My third reason about growing up. I thought Canada was growing up when LaFontaine and Baldwin created one of the most lasting democracies in human history. I thought Canada was growing up when the Fathers of Confederation came together to form a country based on the principles of LaFontaine, Baldwin, and Howe. I thought Canada was growing up when Canadian men and women fought and died in 2 world wars, defending this unique and lasting democracy. I thought Canada was growing up when Lester Pearson created peacekeeping, but I knew Canada was growing up when, like Baldwin and LaFontaine before us, we chose peace over armed conflict by refusing to join the coalition of the willing in Bush's illegal Republican war for oil. To me, this is the moment when Canada truly grew up. Then we decided through our duly elected parliament to join neither the United States or Britain because we found their actions unacceptable to Canadian values. My fourth reason is that the whole discussion of whether or not we should vote to insult the last true queen on the planet with a vote of non-confidence before the first of her dominions to become a democracy, or should we waste time debating about what we might do if and when her son becomes king? Let's concentrate on the real challenges facing our democracy. Electoral reform. We've not fully achieved responsible government until we have a truly representative government, and how to achieve that is one of the complex issues we've ever faced. And finally, the fifth reason I have is that I feel the danger of when we choose the symbols of America, that there's always the possibility that those who have traditionally felt the two countries should be integrated and joined will be that much further along. If we decide that we're replacing the Queen with someone, call her a president, then at some point we'll have 2 presidents in the northern half of North America. Do we really need 2 presidents? Couldn't we just do it with one that would somehow handle both countries, or at least the United States and what used to be Canada? Thank you very much.